for coming to the 2022 Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame induction ceremony. The 2018 recipient of the Parker Bean Lifetime Achievement Award and Executive Chairman of Heaven Hill Brands, to introduce Hall of Fame Roll of Honor recipient, Congressman John Yarmuth of Louisville, the Bourbon City.
Eric, thank you very much. And thank you for you and the team putting together this unbelievable event. Not only the inductees been fantastic, so worthy, so well deserved, but it's just the fact that we can all be together celebrating Kentucky's great spirit signature product. And after 2.5 years, it's about time we've been able to do this, and we can celebrate that as well. So thank you very much for what you've done, what you've been able to get together here today. Now, for me, I've got the great privilege, the great honor of introducing Kentucky's 3rd Congressional District Representative and my friend, John Yarmuth, as a new member of the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. While his presence has been largely in Washington over the last several years, John's roots are firmly planted in Kentucky. He grew up in Louisville, graduated from Atherton High School. After obtaining his college degree from Yale University, John came back to Louisville and distinguished himself in our community through his long ownership of the iconic and somewhat irreverent Leo newspaper and involvement in so many local products and initiatives, with his impact reaching deep into our community before his election to Congress. His work in our nation's capital has been Herculean. He has served and led a range of important committees, including the Committee on Education and the Workplace, the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and most recently serving as chairman of the very powerful House Budget Committee. Throughout his service to the country, he has been recognized for his work to improve education, bring health care to millions of American citizens, and has helped pass the legislation that was so important in defeating the pandemic and rebuilding our economy. His influence continues to educate and will continue to educate and uplift our communities for years to come. Now, that's Washington. But today, all of us here are perhaps most interested in his passion for and impact on bourbon. Well, I can tell you, it's wide and it's deep. As we like to say at Heaven Hill, the history of Kentucky bourbon and American history are intertwined. In Kentucky, during those very early days back in the 1700s, it all began as the nation was being born. It just so happened that around here we had plentiful corn, and we had immigrants who brought over their distilling knowledge from their home countries, and the Kentucky whiskey tradition began. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a lecture on the American History 101, but what happened in the 1700s included some regulation, some government taxation, a constitutional ban on the sale of our products, going through the wartime production situations, and generally gained the attention of a lot of government interest in what would become today one of the largest economic drivers for our Commonwealth. Now, as we've enjoyed the bourbon renaissance and the rise of Kentucky's signature product for the past 2 decades, we've also been supported by John fighting for our success in Washington. A staunch defender of America's native spirit, he has spent nearly 2 decades advocating on behalf of the Kentucky bourbon industry. John efforted hallmark reforms that have been helped lift this industry to be the economic powerhouse it is. These initiatives include the passing of the Craft Modernization and Tax Reform Act, resulting in a permanent reduction in the federal excise tax. This shift in policy alone assists all distillers with the certainty of long-term financial forecasting and has created a runway to maintain and create new, well-paying jobs. He worked with great dedication to establish permanent authorization regulations, which allows distillers to deduct interest carrying costs in the year they are paid, rather than at the end of the lengthy aging process for bourbon, freeing up important capital for reinvestment and job expansion. In the recent, well-known bourbon tariff barriers that were erected that so negatively affected the industry, John assisted in this long and difficult trade dispute, getting our industry to welcome the end of those tariffs. His persistence kept the pressure on and was instrumental in helping to reopen the door to resume the rapid growth from thirsty markets in the European Union and United Kingdom. He supported distillers' efforts to eliminate fees imposed by the Food and Drug Administration, and also helped the industry to navigate through regulations regarding the production of hand sanitizer during the COVID-19 public health emergency, allowing us to give a helping hand to so many in need. One more thing to add, and I put this in the category of, I'm not sure if this was a help, but it sure didn't hurt. One of John's early efforts upon arriving on Capitol Hill was to establish in 2009 and co-chair what was then called, and is still called, the Congressional Bourbon Caucus. It was a bipartisan group of members that got together for post-day, I'm going to put this in quotation marks, bourbon tastings, bringing back to us to a more simple time when both sides talked to each other with a sense of camaraderie and fulfilling discussion. Some of this, of course, was to educate other members on our industry and the dynamics that were involved. But this group, which still exists today, shows that dedication and that relentless kind of support for our industry, and is certainly proof that most folks are willing to reach across the aisle if a good pour of Kentucky bourbon is involved. And not to mention, John was named to the Kentucky Distiller Association's Order of the Writ, our organization that embraces the spirit of Kentucky bourbon education, responsibility, environmental stewardship, history, scholarship, and an unwavering commitment to the furtherance of our native spirit. Now, if I know anything about role transitions, I suspect that John will not just rest on his laurels once his final term in Congress comes to an end. But just for the moment, we were able to pause, reflect, and celebrate his accomplishments together thus far. John, on behalf of the industry, thank you for championing our endeavors in creating a runway for growth for all bourbon distillers, large and small. Please come up and accept your award as a new member of the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame.
Well, hello everybody. Thanks, Max, for that introduction. Thanks for being here to do that. Eric, thanks for all of your efforts. This is an incredibly impressive event, and it's been an honor to work with you over all these years. Thanks to the KDA for this incredible honor. Thanks to all the members of the Hall of Fame for deeming me worthy. I thought I might qualify just based on consumption alone, but it has been quite an honor to represent this industry in the United States Congress. And to form the Congressional Bourbon Caucus, it was interesting. I was walking one day early in my service with Mike Thompson. Mike represents the Napa Valley. He said, "Hey John, there's this wine tasting reception tonight that the Wine Caucus is putting on. Love to have you come." I said, "Wine Caucus? Is there a Bourbon Caucus?" He said, "I don't think so." He said, "Well, there is going to be one if there isn't one, because, I mean, after all, Kentucky's only, United States' only indigenous spirit needs to have a caucus." So I filed the papers to make it an official caucus. Brett Guthrie joined me as co-chair, And we started recruiting members, and all of a sudden we had members from all over the country, and still do. We have about 50 members, which is more than 10% of the House of Representatives. And as was mentioned, it's very bipartisan, which is unlike virtually everything else in Washington today. And yes, we tend to have very popular events. As a matter of fact, that's generally the question I get from most people is, when is the next Bourbon Caucus event? But it goes beyond that. And it does get to this rivalry where other states are trying to stake out territory in the bourbon industry. So I have members bringing me bourbon from all sorts of places. I get Colorado bourbon, Vermont bourbon, Washington State bourbon. And everybody says, well, did you taste it? How did it stack up? I said, don't ask, don't ask. Thank you for the bourbon, don't ask. So I have a large collection of undrunk bourbon. But that's not true of my house. For those of you who are familiar or not familiar with it, there is an urban bourbon trail in Louisville. And you have to have a certain amount of bourbon. So bars and restaurants are eligible. You have to, I think it's 55 there, somewhere in that neighborhood. My house qualifies easily under that standard. We're up to 75 or 80, I think. And my wife Kathy has to figure out where to display them. But I'm here with Kathy, my wife, my son Aaron, and 4 of my great staff who really have done the lion's share of the work representing the bourbon industry. And I do say, most people in Washington, if you can be identified with something, that's how you're known. When I got there, I was known as a golfer, and that's, people would always comment about golf. Now, even though I'm chairman of the budget committee, when I'm introduced by Nancy Pelosi in an event or by Chuck Schumer in an event, they always introduce me as the chairman of the Congressional Bourbon Caucus, not the House Budget Committee. And I don't regret that in the slightest. Just one thing I want to say before I close, and this is a real luxury. In Congress, we generally, if we're on the floor of the House, we generally have at most 2 minutes to talk. Usually it's 1 minute, and we get gavelled down pretty quickly if we exceed it. This is a real luxury to not have somebody timing me. But one of the things that has been so impressive to me over the last 16 years of my service is that when working with the industry, and this has been mentioned before, it has been an amazing, there's been an amazing collegiality among all of the distillers. And when we would have an event, sometimes it would be a political event, I'd have a fundraising event, and when I'd call on distillers to help me with it, they didn't say, well, is so-and-so going to be there, or who else is going to be there? They just said, sure. And that's been true of events that we've done for the general population of the House. We've had Bourbon Caucus events where we invite everyone. We've had 700 or 800 people come to these events. And the Discus and the distillers have worked together to supply product and to help educate those who come to these events about how the bourbon's made, the traditions, and so forth. So it's been a real joy. It's been a labor of love to work with the bourbon industry over my term, and it's a great group of people, a great product, and as we all know, it's the thing that Kentucky is best known for, and I'm very proud to have helped sustain and to promote that image in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And so thank you once again. Thank you for allowing me to make this part of my farewell tour. That was a joke. Although apparently not. But I am retiring. January 3rd will be my last day, but it will not be my last day, my last drink of bourbon, I guarantee you that. Thank you so much.
Weep no more, my lady. Oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for my old Kentucky home, for my old Kentucky. Kentucky home. Para